They found you 3 years ago, flagged by an algorithm, marked as interesting, tagged for observation. Just another file in a system designed to monitor millions. Just another face in a database that stretches across continents. Just another subject. That's what they called you. Subject. Like you were something under a microscope. Something to be dissected. Something to be understood, cataloged, filed away once they cracked the code of how you operate. They were so confident back then. They had the technology. They had the resources. They had decades of experience profiling every type of human mind imaginable. Terrorists, geniuses, world leaders, psychopaths. They'd mapped them all, predicted them all, understood them all. So when your file crossed their desk, they smiled. Another puzzle. Another pattern to decode, another mind to add to their collection of human blueprints. They assigned their best team. 12 analysts with combined experience exceeding 2 centuries. They had psychologists who'd written textbooks, behavioral specialists who'd consulted for 3-letter agencies across 5 countries. Data scientists whose algorithms had prevented attacks, predicted market crashes, identified threats before they materialized. They gave them unlimited access, unlimited budget, unlimited time. Study this one, they said. Map the decision-making patterns. Build a profile. Figure out how this mind works. Simple assignment. Routine work. They'd done it 1,000 times before. They set up surveillance, standard protocol, digital footprint monitoring, communication intercepts, location tracking, the invisible web they've perfected over decades, the one that wraps around a subject without them ever knowing it exists. They watched you wake up. They watched you work. They watched you interact. They watched you make decisions, small ones, big ones, everything in between. They recorded it all, cataloged it all, fed it all into systems designed to find the pattern hiding inside every human being. Because every human being has a pattern. That's the fundamental truth their entire operation is built on. Give them enough data, enough time, enough processing power, and they will find your pattern. They will predict your next move before you make it. They will know you better than you know yourself. That's what they believed. That's what they were certain of when they started watching you. They had no idea what was coming.
Month 1.
The analysts were relaxed, casual. This was routine work. They compiled their initial observations. Subject displays above average intelligence. Subject shows signs of strategic thinking. Subject makes decisions that suggest long-term planning. Nothing unusual. Nothing they hadn't seen before. They figured they'd have you mapped within 6 months, maybe sooner. They noticed you made a choice that seemed suboptimal. A career decision that their models flagged as inefficient. They noted it. Probably emotional reasoning. They wrote, subject may have personal factors overriding logical optimization. They kept watching. 3 months later, that suboptimal decision led to an outcome their models rated as highly improbable. An outcome that positioned you better than any of their predicted optimal paths would have. They adjusted their models. Recalibrated. Assumed they'd missed a variable. They kept watching. Month 4. Something started bothering the lead analyst. Nothing he could articulate. Just a feeling. A sense that something wasn't quite right with this assignment. He reviewed the footage. Standard stuff. You going about your life. Nothing remarkable on the surface. But there was this moment, this brief moment where you looked up from what you were doing, looked directly at a spot where no camera was visible, held that gaze for just a second too long. Coincidence, he told himself. Random glance means nothing. He noted it anyway, just in case. 2 weeks later, you did it again. Different location, different angle, but the same thing. A pause, a look, directly at a surveillance point you shouldn't have known existed. His coffee went cold while he rewatched that footage 17 times. He didn't tell the team, not yet. He wasn't sure what he was seeing, wasn't sure it meant anything. But he started paying closer attention. Month 6. The models weren't working. Every prediction they made about your behavior came back wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. You'd zig when they calculated you'd zag. You'd stay when they predicted you'd leave. You'd speak when they expected silence. You'd go quiet when they anticipated words. They brought in additional analysts, fresh eyes. Maybe the original team was too close to the data. Maybe they needed perspective. The new analyst reviewed everything, ran their own models, applied their own frameworks. Same result. Zero predictive accuracy. One of them made a joke. Maybe we should just predict the opposite of what we think they'll do. Nobody laughed, because they'd tried that, and it didn't work either. You weren't predictable in reverse. You weren't predictable at all. You existed in some space between their categories, some territory their maps didn't cover. The lead analyst started having trouble sleeping. Month 8. The incident that changed everything. They'd been planning a small test. Nothing invasive. They'd arranged for a minor obstacle in your path, a disruption designed to measure your stress response, your problem-solving approach, your adaptation patterns. Standard procedure. They'd done it hundreds of times with other subjects. Introduce a variable. Observe the reaction. Add data to the model. But on the morning they planned to execute the test, you changed your routine. For the first time in months, you took a different route, made different choices, avoided every single point where they'd planned to introduce their variables. Like you knew. They told themselves it was coincidence. You couldn't have known. There was no leak, no breach in security. No way for you to have that information. But the lead analyst pulled the footage from that morning, and he saw you pause at your door before leaving. Saw you stand there for 11 seconds, head slightly tilted, like you were listening to something no one else could hear. Then you turned left instead of right, and their test became irrelevant. He didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Month 10. The first analyst quit. No explanation. No exit interview. Just a resignation letter that said personal reasons and a desk cleared out by morning. 3 days later, the lead analyst found something on his own computer. A file he didn't remember creating. A document with a single line of text. Interesting approach. Wrong conclusions. He had the system checked for breaches. Nothing. No unauthorized access. No evidence anyone had touched his machine. The file was dated 6 months earlier. Created during a period when his computer's logs showed continuous activity from his own credentials. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't remember seeing it before. But there it was. He deleted it. Then checked the system again. then deleted the deletion logs, then sat in his office with the lights off for an hour, trying to understand what was happening. Month 12. 3 more analysts requested transfers. None of them could explain why. None of them had any specific complaint. They just wanted off the project. The ones who remained started noticing things, small things, patterns in the data that seemed almost like messages. Decisions you made that, when viewed in a certain sequence, formed something that looked disturbingly like a response to their analytical framework, like you were answering questions they hadn't asked out loud, like you were participating in a conversation they didn't know they were having. One analyst, the youngest on the team, made an observation during a late-night session. She was exhausted, probably not thinking clearly, definitely not following protocol by voicing unsubstantiated theories. "What if they know?" she asked. Everyone stopped. The room went silent. What if they've known the whole time? What if they're not the subject? What if we are? She was reassigned the next day. Mental health leave. Standard procedure for analysts showing signs of stress-induced paranoia. But her question hung in the air long after she was gone. Month 14. The lead analyst made a decision. Against protocol. Against everything his training told him. He reached out. Not through official channels, not through the surveillance apparatus. He found a way to send a message directly to you. Anonymous, untraceable. Just a question. Do you know? He didn't expect a response. He wasn't even sure why he'd done it. Maybe just to settle his own mind. Maybe just to prove to himself that you were just a subject, just another person being watched, just another file in the system. The response came 3 hours later. Same channel, same encryption. I knew before you started watching. His hands were shaking when he read it. The thing you can't figure out, the message continued, is how I make decisions. You've been trying to map my patterns for over a year. You've failed because you're looking at the wrong thing. You're watching what I do. You should be asking what I see. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then another message arrived. I see you, Marcus. His name, his real name, the one that wasn't in any file connected to this project, the one he hadn't used professionally in 15 years. I've been watching your team since week 2. I know about the algorithm that flagged me. I know about the failed replication attempts. I know about Sarah, the analyst who quit after she dreamed about me 3 nights in a row. I know about the file on your computer, the one you deleted, the one you're still wondering about. I put it there 6 months ago. While your systems showed you were logged in and working, you weren't working, Marcus. You were asleep at your desk. I had 11 minutes. Month 15. The project was officially terminated. Not enough results to justify continued resource allocation. That was the official reason. The real reason sat in a classified briefing that only 4 people ever read. The real reason was that they'd realized, slowly and then all at once, that they hadn't been studying you. You'd been studying them. Every decision they thought they were observing. You'd been making deliberately, feeding them data, showing them patterns that led nowhere, letting them think they were getting closer while you mapped their methods, their blind spots, their limitations. You'd identified their surveillance points within the first 2 weeks, not by finding the cameras, but by feeling the attention, by noticing the weight of observation that most people never register, by developing a sensitivity to being watched that bordered on the supernatural. And instead of hiding, instead of evading, instead of doing what any normal subject would do, you decided to watch back. You studied their analysts through their questions. You learned their frameworks through their predictions. You mapped their psychology through their failed attempts to map yours. Every time they ran a test, you learned something about how they think. Every time they adjusted their models, you understood more about their assumptions. Every time they brought in new team members, you profiled them through the changes in surveillance approach. You built a complete picture of their operation using nothing but their attempts to build a picture of you. Month 16? Marcus received one final message before he resigned from the agency entirely. You want to know why you couldn't replicate my decision-making? I'll tell you. It's not because I'm smarter than your analysts. Some of them are brilliant. It's not because I have access to information you don't. You have more data than I ever will. It's because I don't make decisions the way you think decisions are made. You believe decisions come from processing information. Input leads to analysis, leads to output. That's your model. That's why you built algorithms. That's why you trusted data. But I don't process information to make decisions. I feel the shape of what's coming. I sense the weight of different paths. I know things before I have reasons to know them. You can't replicate that with technology. You can't train analysts to do it. You can't map it or model it or predict it. Because it's not a pattern. It's not a system. It's not something that can be observed and copied. It's what I am, not what I do. And the funniest part? The part that should terrify your entire agency? I'm not special. I'm not unique. I'm not some anomaly that only appears once in a generation. There are others like me, lots of others. People who feel the shape of things. People who know without knowing how they know. People your algorithms flag but can never understand. You've been so busy studying us that you never realized we've been studying you. We know how you operate now. We know your methods. We know your limitations. We know where your blind spots are. And we've been sharing notes. Marcus read the message 7 times. Then he erased every trace of it. Then he wrote his resignation letter. Then he walked away from a career he'd given 3 decades to. Because he understood something that no one in his agency had ever considered. They thought they were the watchers, the ones with the power, the ones with the access, the ones who observed from above while everyone else lived oblivious below. But there are things in this world that can't be watched without watching back. Minds that can't be studied without studying the studier. Patterns that exist outside the patterns they know how to see. They'd spent over a year trying to understand how you make decisions. And in that time, you'd made the most important decision of all. You'd decided to let them watch. You'd decided to learn everything they had to teach you about how their systems work. You'd decided to turn their surveillance into your education. And then you'd decided to let them know. Not because you wanted revenge, not because you wanted to frighten them, but because you wanted them to understand something fundamental about the game they thought they were playing. The hunter and the hunted aren't fixed positions. They're perspectives. And the one who controls the perspective controls everything. They still have a file on you somewhere, buried in a server, marked as closed, tagged with warnings that no one fully understands. But they don't watch anymore. They don't try to predict. They don't attempt to replicate. Because they learned something that all their training never prepared them for. Some people aren't meant to be observed. Some minds aren't meant to be mapped. Some patterns exist specifically to break pattern recognition systems. And some prey, if you watch them long enough, reveal themselves to be something else entirely. You were never the subject. You were the lesson. And the lesson was this: in a world full of people trying to predict and control each other, the only truly unpredictable thing is someone who knows they're being predicted and chooses to become something that can't be controlled. Not through resistance, not through hiding, not through fighting back, through watching, through learning, through becoming so aware of how they see you that you can show them exactly what you want them to see. And then, when you're ready, showing them the truth, that they never had any power over you at all, that you were running the experiment the whole time, that every single thing they thought they discovered was something you decided to reveal, and that the only reason they know any of this now is because you decided it was time for them to know. You didn't just survive their surveillance. You graduated from it, and now you're out there, walking through a world full of people who think they're watching, who think they're in control, who think they understand the game, and you know something they don't. The game changed the moment someone like you decided to play it consciously. The hunters don't know it yet, but they're all prey now, and you're just getting started.
You think you lost, don't you? You're sitting there replaying it over and over, thinking this was the moment everything fell apart. You're telling yourself you hit the bottom, that the ground gave out, that the world finally crushed you. But listen closely. You didn't lose. Not even close. What really happened is this. You finally saw who was never on your side to begin with. And yeah, it hurts. Of course it does. Truth always burns the first time it touches skin. That tight feeling in your chest, that bitterness in your mouth, that silence where people used to be. That's not weakness. That's awareness setting in. See, people love to talk about loyalty when life is easy. They love to talk about brotherhood, about love, about being there no matter what. But those words only mean something when pressure shows up, when things get uncomfortable, when staying costs them something. And that's when you saw it. The moment things stopped being convenient, they disappeared. The moment you needed support instead of applause, they backed away. Not because you did something wrong, not because you weren't enough, but because they were never built to stand next to you. When it mattered, you thought they were solid. You thought they were real. You thought when things got ugly, they would still be there. But when the air got heavy, they chose themselves. They always do. And here's the part nobody tells you. That moment, right there, when they walked away. That was the moment you gained something most people never do. Clarity. You didn't lose support. You lost illusions. You didn't lose friends. You lost actors who were playing a role as long as the scene benefited them. People don't leave because you're broken. They leave because staying would require effort. And effort reveals character. That sting you feel right now, that quiet anger, that cold realization, that's not the end of you. That's the beginning of something sharper. Because now you know. You know who claps when you're winning and who vanishes when you're bleeding. You know who stands beside strength and who avoids struggle. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That knowledge changes you. Not in a loud way, not in some dramatic explosion, but in a slow, permanent shift. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing validation. You stop pouring energy into people who only show up to collect from you. And that's where your real power starts. See, most people go through life begging for loyalty from people who never had it in them. They keep forgiving, keep hoping, Keep reopening wounds just to feel familiar pain. But not you. Not anymore. You've crossed a line. You've seen the pattern. And now you understand something brutal and freeing at the same time. Nobody's coming to save you. And that's okay. Because the moment you stop expecting rescue is the moment you build resilience. The moment you stop leaning is the moment you learn how strong your own legs are. You don't need them. You never did. They needed you. Your energy, your loyalty, your consistency. And once they realized you weren't going to bleed forever for free, they left. That wasn't abandonment. That was exposure. Now pay attention to what happens next. This is where most people mess it up. Some people let this realization rot them. They turn bitter, paranoid, small. They let betrayal poison everything they touch. But you don't do that. You do something smarter. You let it refine you. You stop overgiving. You stop trusting words over actions. You stop confusing familiarity with loyalty. You become quieter, more observant, more selective. Not because you're cold, but because you're awake. And being awake in a world full of pretenders is dangerous. Because now, when someone smiles too easily, you notice. When promises come too fast, you pause. When loyalty is loud but inconsistent, you step back. You're not angry all the time. You're measured. You're grounded. You're controlled. And control is something people who betrayed you never had. They acted on impulse, on comfort, on fear. You're acting on awareness. That's why they'll never understand what you're becoming. They'll assume you moved on. They'll think you forgot. They'll believe you're still the same person who trusted too easily. But you know better. You remember everything, not with rage, with precision. And one day, they'll notice the shift. They'll feel the distance. They'll sense the difference in how you speak, how you move, how you no longer explain yourself. They'll try to come back. They always do. Not because they changed, but because they realized they lost access. And when that day comes, you won't need to say anything. You won't argue. You won't accuse. Your silence will say it all. They'll see it in your posture, in your eyes, in the way you no longer reach for them. They'll realize they miscalculated you because you didn't collapse. You didn't beg. You didn't chase. You adapted. You turned loss into insight. You turned rejection into direction. You turned abandonment into self-reliance. That's not weakness. That's evolution. The world isn't kind to people who stay naive. It rewards those who learn, those who adjust, those who stop romanticizing loyalty and start recognizing patterns. And now you see patterns everywhere. You see who only shows up when it benefits them. You see who disappears when accountability enters the room. You see who confuses closeness with convenience. And instead of being angry about it, you accept it. You move accordingly. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure. You don't need apologies that come too late to matter. Your growth is the response. Because nothing unsettles people more than realizing you no longer need them. They expected you to break. They expected you to stay stuck. They expected you to keep offering access without boundaries. But instead, you leveled up quietly. You became self-sufficient, emotionally independent, mentally disciplined. You became harder to manipulate, harder to distract, harder to use. And that's when the balance shifts. They didn't win. They exposed themselves. You didn't lose, you learned. You learned who disappears under pressure. You learned who values comfort over character. You learned who was never meant to walk the whole road with you. And that lesson, that painful, eye-opening lesson, it made you dangerous in the best possible way. Because now you move through this world with clarity, with restraint, with intent. You don't hand your trust out like spare change anymore. You don't mistake attention for loyalty. You don't confuse history with commitment. You know better now. And once you know, there's no going back. So don't sit there telling yourself you lost. Don't wear failure that doesn't belong to you. Don't mourn people who revealed their limits. You didn't lose. You learned who was never on your side. And that knowledge didn't weaken you. It sharpened you. Welcome to the part of your life where you stop surviving and start choosing, where you stop reacting and start deciding, where you stop trusting blindly and start seeing clearly. This world is cold. It's honest. And it rewards those who learn fast and move smart. And now you're one of them. And here's the part that really settles in once the noise fades, once the anger cools, once the shock wears off. You start noticing how quiet everything becomes. Not empty, quiet. There's a difference. The chaos that used to surround you was never support. It was distraction, voices pulling at you, opinions shaping you, expectations weighing you down. Now, those voices are gone. And for the first time, you can hear yourself think. That silence feels uncomfortable at first. It makes people panic. It makes them rush to fill it with anything familiar, even if it hurts. But you didn't run. You stayed. And in that stillness, something clicks. You realize how much energy you were wasting trying to be understood by people who never intended to understand you. How much effort you poured into relationships that only existed when you were useful. How often you shrank yourself just to keep others comfortable. That realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, almost gently, and it changes how you move. You stop chasing explanations. You stop arguing your value. You stop handing pieces of yourself to people who haven't earned access. You don't announce this shift. You don't warn anyone. You just adjust. And that's when people start feeling it. They can't name it. They can't explain it, but they feel the distance. They notice you're not reacting the same way. You're not overextending. You're not available on demand. You listen more, you speak less, and that silence unsettles them because silence is where intentions get exposed. When you stop filling gaps, people reveal why they were there in the first place. Some fade away completely. No drama. No confrontation. They were only present for the noise anyway. Others try to test boundaries. They reach out casually. They probe. They try to pull you back into old patterns. And you see it immediately, not with anger, with clarity. You don't need to call them out. You don't need to explain why things feel different now. You already know. You learned who stays when nothing is offered, and who only shows up when there's something to take. That lesson doesn't make you cruel. It makes you precise. You stop giving access to people who only consume. You stop rewarding inconsistency. You stop mistaking attention for care. And slowly, something powerful happens. You begin to trust yourself again. Not blindly, not emotionally, but strategically. You trust your instincts, your observations, your ability to read what isn't being said. You stop ignoring red flags just because you want things to work. You stop explaining away behavior that consistently disrespects you. You stop negotiating your self-respect. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. And alignment is dangerous to people who benefit from your confusion. Because when you're aligned, you're no longer predictable. You're no longer easily guilted. You're no longer controlled by approval. You make decisions based on reality, not hope. And hope is what kept you vulnerable before. Hope that they'd change. Hope that they'd show up. Hope that loyalty would magically appear if you gave enough. Now you understand something fundamental. People don't rise to expectations. They operate at character, and character reveals itself under pressure. You saw it. You lived it. You don't need proof anymore. That's why you don't look back the same way. That's why nostalgia doesn't hit like it used to, because you're not remembering the truth. You're remembering the version you wanted to believe in. And you don't need that illusion anymore. You've outgrown it. You're not angry about it, you're grateful. Because clarity is expensive. Most people pay for it with years of repetition. You paid once and you learned fast. Now look at how you carry yourself. Look at how your standards have changed. You don't chase people who disappear. You don't explain yourself to those who misinterpret you on purpose. You don't overinvest in one-sided connections. You watch, you wait, you assess. You let people show you who they are before you decide where they belong in your life. And some people hate that. They were comfortable when you were open without limits. They preferred you when you were always available, when you overgave, when you overexplained. Now they feel the shift. They call it distance. They call it coldness. They call it change. But it's none of those things. It's discernment. You didn't become less human. You became more intentional. And intentional people scare those who rely on chaos, because chaos is where manipulation hides. Chaos is where accountability disappears. But you're not chaotic anymore. You're deliberate. You know when to speak and when to stay silent. You know when to engage and when to walk away. You know when something deserves energy and when it deserves nothing at all. That restraint, that composure, that's what separates survivors from repeat victims. And make no mistake, you survived something that could have hollowed you out. You were abandoned emotionally, left unsupported, exposed at your lowest, and instead of breaking, you adapted. You built internal structure where external support failed. You strengthened boundaries where trust collapsed. That doesn't make you bitter. It makes you resilient. Resilience isn't loud. It doesn't boast. It shows up in consistency, in calm responses, in the refusal to repeat old mistakes. And that's what you're doing now. You're not fighting the world. You're navigating it intelligently. You don't expect fairness. You don't assume loyalty. You observe behavior and respond accordingly. That mindset alone puts you ahead of most people, because most people still want to believe, still want to trust blindly, still want to think effort guarantees respect. You know better now. Effort without boundaries invites exploitation, and you closed that door quietly, firmly, without apology. And here's the irony. Once you stop chasing loyalty, you start attracting authenticity. Because real people respect clarity. They respect consistency. They respect someone who knows who they are and what they tolerate. They don't need you to prove yourself. They don't need constant reassurance. They meet you where you stand. Those people move slower. They speak less. They act more. And you notice them now, because you're no longer distracted by noise. You're not rushing connections. You're not forcing chemistry. You're not ignoring your instincts to avoid being alone. You understand solitude now. You know it's not emptiness. It's space. Space to think, space to build, space to strengthen. And strength built in solitude lasts longer than validation borrowed from others. You're no longer afraid of being alone, because you've already stood alone and survived. That experience rewires something in you. You stop fearing loss, because you've already lost what wasn't real. Now the only things that stay are things that can withstand pressure. And if something leaves, you don't chase it. You don't beg it to stay. You let it go. Not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more than temporary comfort. That's maturity. And maturity is expensive. It costs relationships. It costs familiarity. It costs versions of yourself that were built on compromise. But what you gain is worth it. You gain peace. You gain focus. You gain control over your time and energy. You start choosing where you invest instead of reacting to who demands. And that control changes everything. You sleep better, you think clearer, you move with intention. You don't feel the need to explain your decisions to people who were never invested in your well-being. You let results speak. And results don't argue, they don't justify, they don't debate. They exist. That's why when people from your past look at you now, they don't quite recognize you. You're calmer, more grounded, less reactive. They expected damage. They expected collapse. They expected you to stay stuck in that moment, but you didn't. You absorbed the lesson and moved forward. That's the part they didn't anticipate. They thought losing them would weaken you. They thought walking away would leave you empty. But instead, it forced you inward. And inside, you found structure. You found self-respect. You found boundaries. You found the discipline to protect your energy. That internal shift is irreversible. You can't go back to not knowing. You can't go back to trusting blindly. And you wouldn't want to. Because now you see the world clearly. You see alliances. You see motives. You see patterns repeating in different faces. And instead of being disappointed, you're prepared. Prepared doesn't mean closed. It means selective. You still connect. You still care. But you don't overextend. You let people earn proximity. You let consistency build trust. And that makes your presence valuable because scarcity creates respect, not artificial scarcity, but intentional availability. You are available to what aligns, unavailable to what drains. And that balance keeps you strong. So no, you didn't lose. You learned. You learned who vanishes under pressure. You learned who stays only when it's easy. You learned who was never meant to walk the entire road with you. And that knowledge didn't weaken you. It refined you. You're not reckless anymore. You're not desperate for connection. You're not afraid of being misunderstood by people who never listened anyway. You move with clarity now. And clarity is power. Not the loud kind. Not the aggressive kind. The quiet kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that watches, waits, chooses. That's who you are now. And anyone who gets access to you from this point forward will earn it. Because you didn't lose. You learned who was never on your side. And once you learn that, you never walk the same again.